Welcome to Fragments of History, where we dive into the most impactful moments of the past. Today we'll explore 10 wars that left an indelible mark on humanity, shaping our societies, economies, and the way we understand power. Each of these conflicts represents a turning point in history, with lessons that echo through the ages. Let's begin. The Greco-Persian Wars, fought over 2 centuries ago, were not just battles for land, but struggles for the soul of a civilization. At stake was a way of life, the Greek ideals of freedom and democracy, pitted against the might of the Persian Empire, the superpower of its time. At the height of its power, the Persian Empire stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, dwarfing the independent Greek city-states in both size and resources. But the Greeks had something unique: a fierce independence, an emerging sense of democracy, and leaders willing to gamble everything. It began at Marathon in 490 BCE, where a vastly outnumbered Athenian force defeated the Persian invaders. This victory proved that the Persian juggernaut could be stopped, but the conflict was far from over. A decade later, Xerxes I launched a massive invasion. The Persian king assembled one of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen. The Greeks, though outnumbered, united under a fragile alliance to resist. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans and their allies became legends, holding back the Persian tide at a great cost. The turning point came not on land but at sea. At Salamis, Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into a narrow strait where their numbers became a disadvantage. The Greek triremes, swift and maneuverable, obliterated the Persian navy. This victory forced Xerxes to retreat, leaving his army stranded. With the Persian forces in disarray, the Greeks delivered the final blow at Plataea. This victory ended the Persian threat and secured the future of Greece. The Greco-Persian Wars were more than a clash of empires. They were a defense of a way of life. Without these victories, democracy might have been extinguished before it ever had the chance to thrive. The ideals born in Athens would go on to shape Western civilization and inspire generations to come. One of the most intense rivalries of the ancient world, the Punic Wars. Imagine this: 2 titans clashing for dominance over the Mediterranean. On one side, Rome, an ambitious republic with dreams of conquest. On the other, Carthage, a wealthy maritime superpower, ruling the waves and controlling the trade routes. This was no ordinary conflict. This was a fight for supremacy, and it would change the course of history forever. Let's start with the First Punic War. Picture this. It's 264 BCE. Rome, a land-based military powerhouse, faces Carthage, the undisputed ruler of the sea. Carthage had the experience, but Rome had determination, and they had a secret weapon, the corvus. This boarding device turned sea battles into land fights, something Rome excelled at. After 23 years of brutal conflict, Rome emerged victorious, seizing control of Sicily. This was their first step toward becoming a Mediterranean powerhouse. Now let's talk about Hannibal. The Second Punic War was his time to shine, or rather, terrify Rome. In 218 BCE, he did the unthinkable. Led an army, complete with war elephants, across the treacherous Alps to invade Italy. His tactical genius was unmatched. At the Battle of Cannae, he crushed a Roman army twice his size. But here's the twist. Despite his victories, Hannibal could never capture Rome itself. The city held strong, and the tides began to turn. The climax of the Punic Wars came in 202 BCE at the Battle of Zama. Rome, under Scipio Africanus, had learned from Hannibal's tactics. They countered his elephants and struck hard on Carthaginian soil. The result? Total Roman victory. Hannibal, the once unstoppable force, was finally defeated. This was more than just a battle. It was the moment that sealed Rome's dominance in the ancient world. But Rome wasn't done yet. Decades later, in the Third Punic War, they decided Carthage had to be erased. The city was besieged, burned to the ground, and its people enslaved. By 146 BCE, Carthage was no more. It was a brutal end, but it marked the beginning of Rome as the uncontested superpower of the Mediterranean. With Carthage gone, Rome had no rivals. The Mediterranean became their domain, the so-called Mare Nostrum, our sea. This victory laid the foundation for Rome's transformation into an empire, shaping the ancient world for centuries to come. The Punic Wars weren't just about battles. They were about destiny, Rome's and by extension ours. Our story begins with a claim to the English throne. Edward the Confessor's death in 1066 left a power vacuum, sparking a bitter struggle. Harold Godwinson, crowned king, faced threats from both Norway and Normandy. Across the Channel, William of Normandy prepared for what would be the most ambitious invasion in European history. October 14th, 1066. The fields of Hastings witnessed a battle that would decide the fate of England. William's forces, with their cavalry and archers, faced Harold's shield wall. The Normans feigned retreat, drawing the English into a fatal trap. By sunset, Harold was dead, and William had secured his place in history. With Harold defeated, William marched to London, claiming the throne. His coronation at Westminster Abbey marked the beginning of Norman rule, a transformation that reshaped England's future. New laws, architecture, and even language began to weave a tapestry of Anglo-Norman identity. The Norman conquest was more than a victory on the battlefield. It was a cultural revolution. The English language absorbed Norman French, feudalism reshaped society, and iconic structures like the Tower of London symbolized Norman power. Even today, the echoes of 1066 remain deeply ingrained in English identity. Our journey begins in the steppes of Mongolia. Temujin, a boy born into a fractured tribe, would unite warring clans and forge a military machine like no other. In 1206, he became Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. His vision, to conquer the known world. The Mongol army wasn't just massive, it was disciplined, fast, and innovative. Their strategies would terrify and overwhelm their enemies. The Mongols were unstoppable. Their conquests stretched from China to Persia, using a combination of military brilliance and psychological warfare. Entire cities surrendered without a fight, fearing the wrath of the Mongol horde. By the 1240s, they had reached Eastern Europe. The Mongols also revolutionized siege warfare, using engineers to build siege engines and adapting techniques from conquered peoples. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they connected. Under their rule, the Silk Road flourished, allowing goods, ideas, and technologies to flow between East and West. Chinese inventions like paper and gunpowder reached Europe, while Persian art and science influenced the East. This unprecedented exchange of knowledge laid the groundwork for the Renaissance and reshaped global culture forever. But the Mongols' vast network had unintended consequences. Their empire inadvertently facilitated the spread of the Black Death, a plague that devastated Europe, Asia, and the Middle East in the 14th century. Trade routes that once carried silk and spices now carried disease. The Mongols had reshaped the world, sometimes in ways they never intended. By the late 14th century, the Mongol Empire fractured, but its legacy endured. The Pax Mongolica had united vast territories, fostering trade and cultural exchange. Their innovations in governance and warfare influenced empires long after their decline. The Mongols proved that even the fiercest conquerors can leave a lasting mark, not just in destruction, but in creation and connection. The roots of the 100 Years' War lay in a complex web of claims and alliances. When Charles IV of France died without an heir, England's Edward III asserted his claim to the French throne through his mother, Isabella. The French rejected Edward, crowning Philip VI instead, sparking a century-long struggle for dominance. This wasn't just a war of swords and spears. It was a battle for the future of two nations. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, England unleashed a game-changer, the longbow. With its range and piercing power, the longbow devastated French knights and marked the beginning of a shift in medieval warfare. The age of the heavily armored knight was fading. This deadly weapon symbolized the rise of the common soldier and the decline of feudal warfare. By 1429, France was losing hope, until a young peasant girl named Joan of Arc claimed divine visions. She rallied French forces and led them to victory at the Siege of Orléans, turning the tide of the war. Her courage inspired a nation, though her life ended in tragedy. Joan became a symbol of resistance and faith, her legacy enduring long after the war ended. Despite early victories, England's fortunes waned. The French adapted their strategies, and with the help of Joan's inspiration and the leadership of King Charles VII, France reclaimed its territory. By 1453, England's control was reduced to the port of Calais. The war solidified the concept of nation-states, with France and England emerging as distinct entities. The Hundred Years' War reshaped Europe. Feudalism declined, replaced by centralized monarchies. The war's lessons in warfare, national identity, and resilience echo in the histories of England and France to this day. It was more than a war. It was the birth of modern nations. In 1775, tensions between the American colonies and Britain erupted into conflict. The colonies had grown weary of taxation without representation and British control over their affairs. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the start of the American Revolution, a fight for liberty that would change the course of history. It wasn't just a battle for independence, it was a struggle for the right to self-govern and define a new identity. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. This document boldly proclaimed the colonies' separation from Britain and articulated ideals of liberty and equality that would echo through history. This wasn't just a declaration, it was a promise of a new world order. The tide of the war turned in 1777 with the American victory at Saratoga. This decisive battle convinced France to join the war as an ally, providing critical support that would eventually lead to American success. Saratoga wasn't just a victory, it was a signal to the world that the American cause could prevail. By 1781, American forces, with the help of the French, surrounded British troops at Yorktown. After weeks of siege, British General Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending the war. The victory at Yorktown marked the birth of a new nation. This was the moment when the dream of independence became a reality. The American Revolution didn't just create a nation, it inspired a world. Its ideals of liberty, democracy, and self-determination fueled revolutions in France, Latin America, and beyond. The revolution proved that ordinary people could shape their destiny. The birth of the United States was not just an end, but a beginning. But no rise to power is without resistance, and Napoleon's ambitions would soon ignite flames of war that would consume Europe. His dreams of domination would meet both triumph and tragedy on the battlefields of history. Now let us follow the footsteps of his Grande Armée as they march across Europe, forever altering the continent's destiny. From a humble Corsican officer to Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power during the French Revolution. His brilliance on the battlefield and his vision for a new Europe captured the imagination of an entire continent. But his ambitions also set the stage for nearly 2 decades of conflict. Napoleon wasn't just a man, he was a force of history reshaping the world around him. Napoleon's military genius was unmatched. His Grande Armée, the largest and most disciplined force of its time, conquered much of Europe. Victories like Austerlitz in 1805 solidified his reputation as one of history's greatest generals. But every empire has its limits, and Napoleon's ambition would soon meet its greatest challenges. In 1812, Napoleon made his fateful decision to invade Russia. The campaign began with grand victories, but ended in disaster as the harsh winter, scorched earth tactics, and fierce Russian resistance decimated his once mighty Grande Armée. It was a turning point that marked the beginning of the end for Napoleon's empire. Napoleon's final stand came at Waterloo in 1815. Allied forces led by the Duke of Wellington and Prussian troops under Blücher dealt a decisive blow, ending Napoleon's rule and reshaping Europe's balance of power. Waterloo wasn't just a battle, it was the end of an era. After Napoleon's defeat, the Congress of Vienna sought to restore order to a war-torn Europe. The Napoleonic Wars reshaped borders, fostered nationalism, and influenced revolutions for decades to come. His Napoleonic Code remains a cornerstone of modern law. Though defeated, Napoleon's impact on the world endures in ways both profound and complex. The world wars of the 20th century were not just wars of nations. They were wars that altered the very fabric of human civilization. The 2 global conflicts, World War I and World War II, redefined power, technology, and geopolitics, leaving scars that would never heal. These wars reshaped the world, giving rise to institutions like the United Nations and setting the stage for the modern global order. The horrors of war, the advancement of technology, and the resilience of the human spirit, these are the legacies of the world wars. World War I erupted in 1914. A war rooted in nationalism, imperialism, and tangled alliances. The conflict rapidly escalated, with nations pulling one another into the fray. The war was characterized by its trench warfare, where soldiers endured unimaginable hardships as they faced deadly artillery, chemical weapons, and constant fear. By the end, over 10 million soldiers had perished, and entire empires were dismantled. This war was not only a battle of armies, but a test of human endurance, and it would lay the foundation for future conflict. Just over 2 decades after the First World War II erupted, driven by the rise of totalitarian regimes and aggressive expansionism, the war spanned every continent and involved more than 100 million people. It was marked by brutal combat, the Holocaust, and the use of atomic weapons. By its end in 1945, over 70 million people had died, and much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins. World War II reshaped not only nations, but the very concept of warfare, ushering in the era of nuclear weapons and shifting global power dynamics. The toll of both world wars cannot be measured only in numbers. Beyond the millions of lives lost, the wars gave rise to new technologies and medical advancements. Innovations such as radar, jet engines, and antibiotics were born from the need to gain an upper hand in battle. But these advancements came at a heavy cost. For all the progress made, the true price of war is always measured in human lives. The world wars didn't just end with victory or defeat, they changed the very landscape of the 20th century. From the formation of the United Nations to the Cold War that divided the world, the consequences of these conflicts reverberated for generations. The wars left behind not just destruction, but a legacy that continues to shape the political, social, and technological world we live in today. After the devastation of the world wars, the Cold War emerged, not as a traditional battle of armies, but as a fierce ideological struggle. Between 1947 and 1991, the world's 2 superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, locked horns in a battle for influence and dominance. It wasn't fought with guns and bombs, but through proxy wars, espionage, and an escalating nuclear arms race. This conflict set the stage for a new world order, one still felt in global politics today. The Cold War shaped not only the geopolitics of the 20th century, but also the everyday lives of people around the world, with the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Cold War was the nuclear arms race. Both the US and the Soviet Union amassed vast stockpiles of nuclear weapons, leading to a constant state of heightened tensions. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war when Soviet missiles were discovered in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US coast. This was a defining moment in the Cold War. One misstep could have led to global catastrophe. The Berlin Wall stood as the physical and ideological divide between East and West. Constructed in 1961, it separated families and friends and was a constant reminder of the separation between the capitalist West and the communist East. For nearly 3 decades, it was a symbol of oppression and the battle for supremacy between the 2 superpowers. But in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, an act that symbolized the end of the Cold War and the triumph of freedom over division. While the Cold War was a battle of ideologies, it also played out in the skies. The space race, a competition between the US and the USSR to dominate space exploration, was one of the most significant aspects of the Cold War. From the launch of Sputnik to the American Apollo missions, the race to land a man on the moon became a powerful symbol of technological and political superiority. The space race captured the imagination of the world and became a metaphor for the broader ideological conflict between East and West. The Cold War finally came to an end in 1991, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The ideological battle that had defined nearly half a century of global politics faded into history. But its legacy endures, with ongoing political tensions and divisions rooted in the Cold War's history. While the Cold War may have ended, its impact is still felt in global politics today, reminding us that the past is never truly gone. These 10 wars didn't just change the course of history, they changed humanity itself. From the ancient battles of the Greeks and Persians to the global conflicts of the world wars, each of these moments reshaped our societies, our cultures, and our understanding of power. But perhaps most importantly, They taught us lessons in resilience, sacrifice, and the true cost of war. As we reflect on these pivotal conflicts, we are reminded of the power we have to shape our future. By understanding the past, we can move toward a better tomorrow, avoiding the mistakes of those who came before us. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the moments that shaped our world, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode on the forgotten stories of history.